When we talk about the iconic faces of Hollywood in the 1980s and 1990s, the name Tom Selleck inevitably stands out as an unforgettable figure. With his trademark mustache, rugged looks, and undeniable masculinity, he became a cultural icon, leaving a lasting mark through a series of legendary roles. From the private investigator Thomas Magnum in Magnum P.I. to police commissioner Frank Reagan in Blue Bloods, Tom Selleck has brought to life generations of characters with a unique allure. Fans admire him not only for his acting talent, but also for his integrity and simple lifestyle, which set him apart in the often scandal-ridden world of Hollywood. Yet Tom Selleck has never been just a movie star. Before he found his place in the acting world, he was an athlete, even considered a military career, and endured years of struggle in Hollywood before fame finally came his way. Through it all, he never lost his humility. Even at the height of his success, he chose a quieter life on his ranch in California, far from lavish parties, devoting his time to family. It is precisely this choice that made Tom Selleck's image so distinctive and enduring, transcending the boundaries of a typical Hollywood actor. But now, at 80, behind that calm and steady gaze lies a chapter of life shadowed by darkness and weighed down with sorrow. Beneath it all are losses too deep to erase, the relentless grip of a body growing frail, and silent pains he rarely speaks of. They come like merciless trials, pushing to the very limits the will and the heart of a man who has given so much of himself to others. And beyond the glow of stardom, there remain untold truths and quiet sacrifices that, once heard, echo in the soul like a haunting refrain, impossible to forget. The man America came to trust was first shaped in a home lit by love, but shadowed by the quiet hardships that teach a child to stand tall long before he is ready. Born in 1945 in Detroit, Michigan, Tom Selleck came into a world still recovering from the war, a time when stability was hard-earned and nothing was taken for granted. His father, Robert, a disciplined man with a sharp but steady gaze, worked tirelessly in real estate, not for wealth or prestige, but simply to keep the family of six secure. His mother, Martha, devoted her life to raising Tom and his three siblings, filling their modest home with warmth, even when resources were scarce. By 1952, when Tom was just 7, the family packed their hopes and moved west to Sherman Oaks, California, a decision driven not by the lure of Hollywood, but by the promise of better opportunities. In that sun-soaked suburb, the young Tom grew up within sight of Los Angeles, yet far from its glitter, more comfortable listening than leading, carrying an early awareness that life was not always fair, but could still be meaningful. There were no luxury cars, no lavish vacations. The family's real wealth lay in values, discipline, honesty, humility, lessons drilled into him through both love and expectation. My parents gave me something money couldn't buy. They taught me to be steady when life isn't, Tom would recall decades later, his voice quiet but firm, as if still holding those words close. Sports became his refuge, and by his teens in the early 1960s, basketball had claimed his heart, teaching him resilience through grueling practices and silent disappointments. Coaches noticed his discipline, teachers admired his manners. Yet Tom never saw himself as special, only as someone trying to do things right, one step at a time. The discipline his father modeled could be demanding, and there were nights when the house felt smaller than their hopes. But no one complained. Love filled the gaps that comfort could not. Then at 17, life delivered a jolt he could never have prepared for. A sudden car accident on an ordinary day, the kind that leaves you staring at the sky, wondering how the world can change in a heartbeat. The injuries were not life-ending, but they left a mark far deeper than scars. They were a blunt reminder that youth is not invincible and that even the strongest plans can be broken in an instant. Friends saw him return to the court weeks later, moving a little slower, thinking a little longer before taking a shot. But inside, Tom had learned something that no coach could teach: how fragile time is and how precious the people you love truly are. By 1962, that persistence earned him a scholarship to the University of Southern California. Not because he was the flashiest player, but because he was consistent, dependable, the kind of teammate others could trust. Majoring in business administration, he imagined a future in real estate, perhaps following his father's path, unaware that fate had already planted seeds for a different calling. Looking back, those early years were not free of struggle. They were quietly shaping a young man to carry the weight of future trials with grace. The boy who measured success by points scored on the court would one day measure it by promises kept, battles faced with dignity, and a life lived with unwavering integrity. Even when the world tested him to his core, by the time the boy from Sherman Oaks reached his early 20s, life was already preparing to test him in ways that would leave marks far deeper than the eye could see. In 1965, while completing his degree at the University of Southern California, a single unexpected invitation from a drama coach pulled him into a world he had never sought, a modest theater class that would quietly, almost imperceptibly, alter the course of his life. On stage, he discovered something startling, a new form of discipline, a team unlike any he had known, in a way to reach people without ever raising his voice. Determined to honor this new calling, he began taking on the smallest of roles, anonymous figures in television backgrounds, commercials for soft drinks and grooming products, anything to keep him close to the work, anything to keep the ember alive. It was not glamorous, but it was survival for the dream he was just learning to love. Then in 1967, at just 22, that fragile momentum shattered. A draft notice arrived, and without a pause for calculation, Tom answered the call, joining the California Army National Guard and serving 6 long years with the 160th Infantry Regiment. Later, he would recall it simply, "I never thought about what it might cost me. I just knew it was something I had to do." But the cost was real, and it cut deeper with every passing year. In an industry obsessed with youth and perfect timing, 6 years away was not a pause. It was an eraser. By the time he returned to civilian life in 1973, the few doors that had begun to open were locked tight. There was no welcome back, no handshake from fate, only the hollow truth. He was older, unknown, and now competing against faces that had been building their futures while his was on hold. He started over from nothing. Guest spots, single lines, scenes so fleeting you could miss them if you blinked. And then came the rejections, quiet, unrelenting. 6 different television pilots offered the promise of a breakthrough, only to be buried before the public ever saw them. Each time he took the call from his agent, thanked them, hung up, and folded the script with the same slow, deliberate care, as if laying a dream to rest. You start to wonder if you're just rehearsing for a dream that isn't yours to keep. He would later admit, the grind was punishing, the paychecks barely enough, and with each passing season, the gap between where he stood and where he longed to be stretched wider, colder. Yet he refused to surrender. He kept walking into auditions, kept training at the Beverly Hills Playhouse, kept accepting roles most actors would dismiss, believing that mastery earned in obscurity was still mastery worth having. By the late 1970s, the patience began to bear its first fragile fruit. Casting directors remembered not the flash, not the fame, but the steadiness, the quiet grounding that made every scene feel true. That quality caught the eye of producers on The Rockford Files, where he was cast as private investigator Lance White, a man whose quiet confidence and understated charm mirrored his own. Audiences noticed, critics noticed, and for the first time in more than a decade, the tide seemed to shift. But even as recognition began to flicker, behind the smile lived the memory of every closed door, every role lost in silence, every year sacrificed to duty and the passage of time. Those years, the lean, lonely, unseen years, did more than teach Tom Selleck to act. They taught him to endure, to rebuild, to carry himself with grace when the applause never came. And though the world would one day know him as a star, it was in these long, punishing shadows that he became the man America would one day trust. The tide that had once resisted him finally surged forward in 1980 when, at 35, Tom Selleck stepped into the role that would define an era. Thomas Magnum in Magnum P.I. Almost overnight, the mustache, the Hawaiian shirts, the disarming smile, and the quiet honor of the character made him a fixture in millions of living rooms across America. A man audiences felt they knew and trusted. The show was more than a job. It was a cultural phenomenon. Yet, behind the effortless charm lay a punishing reality few could imagine. Magnum was a weekly, hour-long drama filmed largely on location in Hawaii, demanding 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week under an unrelenting sun for 8 consecutive seasons. It was a schedule that tested endurance as much as talent, leaving little room for rest and even less for a personal life. Holidays were swallowed by production. Birthdays and milestones passed in hotel rooms or on set, and moments with family became rare treasures stolen between flights back to work. In later years, Tom would say, "It was the best job I ever had, but it took a lot out of me, more than I realized at the time." A reflection that hinted at the invisible cost of living inside a role the world adored. And yet, even at the crest of this success, fate dealt a blow that was as cruel as it was unforgettable. In 1981, an extraordinary opportunity to take on a legendary film role slipped away, not because he failed an audition, but because he chose to honor the contract that had given him Magnum in the first place. That decision, made with integrity, cost him a place in cinematic history, a trade-off that would shatter his heart for years, a bittersweet reminder that in Hollywood, loyalty can come at the highest personal price. Still, he pressed on, carrying the weight of expectation week after week, knowing that millions were watching, waiting for him to be perfect every time. The pressure was relentless. Scripts rewritten overnight, network demands to push harder, and the quiet fear that one misstep could shatter the bond with an audience that had elevated him so high. When Magnum P.I. finally ended in 1988 at the age of 40, the silence that followed was almost disorienting. After years of constant motion, the stillness felt like a void, and the industry that had once chased him now seemed to linger at arm's length, wondering if he could be more than Magnum. Roles came, but so did the comparisons, the persistent whispers that he might never escape the shadow of his most famous character. Some scripts promised reinvention, but faltered before release, each disappointment magnified under the glare of public expectation. Yet through it all, Tom refused to compromise the principles that had guided him from the start, choosing only work that felt true, even if it meant walking away from lucrative offers, enduring the quiet ache of opportunities lost, and rebuilding his career on his own terms. Casting directors still saw in him that rare steadiness, the ability to ground a scene with authenticity. And in time, this quality led to acclaimed roles in film and television that proved his range and staying power. But the paradox of his peak remained. A life bathed in the golden glow of fame on screen and behind the scenes. The quiet, heartbreaking arithmetic of what it had demanded from him. Those years taught Tom more than how to lead a hit series. They taught him the cost of keeping faith within himself, the discipline to carry the weight of expectation without breaking, and the grace to endure the lonely spaces that even the brightest spotlight cannot fill. And though the world would remember him first as Magnum, those who looked closer would see a man who had met triumph and sacrifice in equal measure and walked through both with his head held high. At the height of Magnum P.I. in the early 1980s, Tom Selleck seemed to be living the kind of life most could only dream about. The world saw the easy smile, the rugged charm, the man in the red Ferrari who always had the answer. But off-screen, a far more painful story was unfolding, one that no camera could soften. In 1982, as his career reached a fever pitch, the foundation of his personal life cracked wide open. His marriage to actress Jacqueline Ray, a union that had carried him through the lean years, ended in quiet devastation. To the public, it was just another headline in a tabloid. But for Tom, it was, as he would later admit, the worst thing that ever happened to me. They had married in 1971 when his name meant little outside casting offices and commercials. Through every rejection, every pilot that failed, every long day on set, Jacqueline was there, her belief in him never wavering. He had adopted her young son Kevin and built a family as best he could on the unpredictable income of a working actor. By the time Magnum P.I. turned him into a household name, they had weathered more storms together than most couples faced in a lifetime. But fame, for all its rewards, is rarely gentle. The demands of a hit series were relentless. 16-hour shoot days, weeks of publicity tours, months without the quiet rhythms of home. The strain crept in slowly. At first, just the absence of shared meals, then missed anniversaries, then conversations cut short by exhaustion. Tom was not a man to speak publicly about private pain, but those close to him recall the way his shoulders seemed to carry more than the scripts each day. There was a sadness in his eyes during press junkets, a faint hesitation before answering questions about family life. When the divorce came, it was not marked by a public scandal or cruelty, just the aching stillness of two people who could no longer bridge the distance that success had built between them. The papers called it irreconcilable differences. For Tom, it was the loss of a partner who had been there before the spotlight, someone who had known him before the world decided who he was. "I thought we could hold on," he would reflect years later. But sometimes love and life just stop meeting in the same place. There was no bitterness in his voice, only the quiet acceptance of a man who understood that even deep bonds can be worn thin by time and circumstance. He remained a father to Kevin, honoring the role he had chosen the moment he said, "I do," even as he faced the unfamiliar silence of an empty home. The timing could not have been more cruel. While his career was delivering him the kind of recognition he had worked decades to earn, his personal life was in pieces. It is one of life's sharpest ironies, to stand before millions, adored, while privately wondering how to rebuild the place you once felt safest. The set of Magnum P.I. became both a refuge and a reminder. The scripts kept him busy, but the family dinners, the laughter behind closed doors were gone. And yet, even in heartbreak, Tom carried himself with the same quiet integrity that defined his career. He spoke no ill of Jacqueline, refused to turn pain into performance. Those who knew him best say that in those years he learned perhaps the hardest lesson of all, that love is not about possession, but about the courage to let go when holding on would cause more harm than healing. The experience left scars, yes, but it also left space. Space to reflect on the kind of partner he wanted to be, the kind of life he still hoped to build. And in that space, he held on to something rare in Hollywood, a belief that love, in its truest form, was still worth waiting for. It would take 5 more years before he found it again in Jilly Mack, a woman whose laughter would fill the quiet places and whose presence would anchor him in a way fame never could. For the fans, Tom Selleck was the unshakable hero of Magnum P.I., cool under pressure, always ready with the perfect line. But for the man himself, 1982 was the year he learned that even the strongest can be brought to their knees. That even in the glow of success, shadows can fall. And perhaps it was that truth, lived and not just acted, that made his on-screen heroes feel so real. In the summer of 1983, barely a year after the quiet devastation of his first marriage's end, Tom Selleck boarded a plane to London for what was meant to be a brief escape, a chance to step outside the whirlwind of Magnum P.I. and breathe somewhere the cameras couldn't follow. He was at the height of his fame, his face on magazine covers, his name in living rooms across America. Yet privately, he was still learning how to live with the silence that waited at home. One evening, a fellow actor suggested they see the smash hit West End musical Cats. Tom, boy, never one to chase the theater spotlight, agreed more out of courtesy than curiosity. But as the stage lights dimmed and the first note swelled, his attention locked not on the elaborate set or dazzling costumes, but on one performer whose energy seemed to light the stage from within. Jilly Mack, lively, graceful, her smile as unguarded as a child's, was playing Rumple Teaser. In that role, she somehow made the crowded theater feel like an intimate room. When the final curtain fell, Tom found himself lingering in the lobby, uncharacteristically nervous. Friends would later tease that the man who faced down villains on screen couldn't quite find the words to introduce himself, but he did. And something about Jilly's laugh, a laugh that didn't seem to care that she was speaking to Tom Selleck, television star, stuck with him. In the weeks that followed, he returned to see Cats and again. By the third visit, the cast noticed the tall American in the audience. But for Tom, it wasn't about making an impression. It was about feeling something rare in the wake of so much loss. The quiet excitement of possibility. Jilly was warm, quick-witted, and unaffected by the trappings of fame. For a man who had just learned how fragile love could be, her presence was a relief he hadn't known he needed. Their courtship wasn't the kind splashed across tabloids. It was dinners tucked away from flashbulbs, long conversations about books and family, afternoons walking through London parks where no one cared about Nielsen ratings. Jilly had her own career, her own passions, and she met Tom as an equal, not as a shadow of his success. By 1987, after 4 years of building a relationship away from the relentless public gaze, Tom and Jilly married in a small, private ceremony. It was everything his first wedding had not been, intentionally quiet, deliberately theirs. Those who attended still speak of the way Tom looked at Jilly, as though he had been handed something too precious to put into words. For Tom, this second marriage wasn't about filling a void. It was about building a life. Together, they bought a ranch in Ventura County, far from Hollywood's glare. A place where the smell of hay and the sound of horses replaced the constant hum of studio work. Tom famously adjusted his career, turning down roles and reshaping his schedule to be home more. "I knew what I didn't want to lose again," he said years later, a clear nod to the lessons learned from his first marriage. In 1980, their joy deepened with the birth of their daughter, Hannah Margaret Selleck. Fatherhood, this time in the stability of a steady marriage, was a gift Tom didn't take lightly. He was determined to be there, present in moments big and small, from bedtime stories to school plays. Friends noticed the change in him. The man once driven entirely by the grind of show business now measured success by the steadiness of his home life. Looking back, it's tempting to see their meeting as fate, but Tom would describe it differently. It wasn't about destiny. It was about timing and being ready to recognize something good when it's in front of you. It's in. That readiness, born from heartbreak, served him well in the years to come, for life wasn't done testing him. The ranch was quiet, the family strong, and love had returned in a form he trusted. But just when the storm seemed to have passed, an unexpected shadow fell over their home, a challenge not to his career, but to the very heart of his role as a father. And this time, the fight ahead would not play out in front of cameras, but in the hushed, sterile hallways of a hospital. In 1938, at age 43, Tom Selleck's life changed forever when his second wife, Jilly Mack, gave birth to their only child, a daughter they named Hannah Margaret. She was not just another chapter in his life, she was the heart of it. Tom, already a household name thanks to Magnum P, now felt a joy that eclipsed every award, every headline. "From the moment I saw her, I knew nothing else would matter as much," he said years later. But in 1991, when Hannah was just 3, joy turned to fear. A fever that seemed harmless in the morning spiraled by night into a terrifying fight for breath. Doctors diagnosed Hannah with acute pneumonia, a phrase that sounded clinical to others, but to Tom felt like a verdict that could shatter his world. The sight of his tiny daughter in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and monitors, was devastating. The man who faced danger on screen could do nothing here but hold her hand and hope. The corridors of the children's ward became his world. He memorized the sound of monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the way Hannah's small fingers curled around his. Jilly stayed beside them, their silence heavy with unspoken prayers. There were days when she improved, only to face setbacks that crushed their hope again. And then Tom made a choice that stunned Hollywood. In '92, at the height of his career, He stepped away from acting for 3 full years. No press release, no dramatic announcement, just the quiet conviction that nothing mattered more than being there for his little girl. I could always make another movie, he later reflected, but I could never get back the time I might lose with her. By the mid-1990s, Hannah had not only recovered but found a new passion. At age 4, she began riding horses. By 10, she was competing in show jumping. Tom was always there at the rail, the proud father watching his daughter soar over obstacles with the same determination he once showed in chasing his dreams. But in 2018, fate tested them again. At 29, competing at the prestigious Spruce Meadows in Calgary, Canada, Hannah suffered a devastating fall when her magnetic stirrup failed to release. In an instant, the vibrant athlete who once beat pneumonia as a child was on the ground, her leg broken in 2 places, tibia and fibula shattered. The crowd went silent, the announcer's voice fading into an anxious hum. For Tom, the moment was a cruel flashback to the hospital corridors of her childhood. Only now the stakes were different. His daughter was no longer a fragile little girl, but seeing her in pain cut just as deeply. Hannah's recovery was long and grueling, multiple surgeries, months on crutches, endless physical therapy. Each step forward was marked by pain but also resilience. Through it all, Tom and Jilly were there, as they had been in 1991, proving that for their family, love was measured in presence, not inconvenience. Today, Hannah is back in the saddle, stronger than ever, her equestrian career thriving. Yet the shadow of those moments, the pneumonia that nearly took her as a child, the fall that could have ended her passion, lingers in the quiet spaces of Tom's memory. In all his years in Hollywood, these are the roles he values most: the vigilant father in the hospital chair, the steady presence at the arena fence, the man who put everything aside when his daughter needed him. Perhaps that's why America still trusts Tom Selleck. Beyond the fame and roles, he is a father who twice faced the unthinkable and stayed. The man who could have had everything chose to keep the one thing he could never replace. He had just weathered the long nights and fragile days of his daughter's illness, carrying a private weight heavier than any role he played. That kind of battle leaves a man changed, quieter, more deliberate, more aware of how fragile the things we love can be. Yet, even as home life found balance again, a new chapter in his professional life demanded a different strength. Taking on the role of Police Commissioner Frank Reagan in Blue Bloods, he returned to the screen not with the swagger of a man chasing relevance, but with the resolve of someone who still had something worth saying. For 14 seasons, he shouldered the grueling pace of long shooting days, relentless scripts, and the unspoken pressure of holding a show together as the years crept on. The work was no easier than in his youth. Now his body whispered reminders that time doesn't wait. Memorizing lines took longer. Days that began before sunrise stretched into nights lit by studio lamps. In the show's final season, another test came, not from the scripts, but from the network. Budget cuts threatened the very family the cast and crew had become. Without hesitation, he and his co-stars agreed to a 25% pay cut, a quiet sacrifice to ensure the story could end on its terms. No press releases, no headlines, just a man shouldering weight so others could finish the journey with dignity. When filming wrapped, the applause was warm, the farewells heartfelt, but the silence that followed was sharper than any goodbye. 14 years of embodying loyalty, justice, and family values were over. Once again, he faced the vast unknown without the anchor of daily work, a mix of relief and loss, a reminder that even the most enduring chapters close. Long before Blue Bloods, before contracts and call sheets dictated his days, Tom Selleck built a refuge far from Hollywood's noise. A 65-acre ranch in Hidden Valley, California, purchased in 1988, once owned by Dean Martin, became his sanctuary, where he and Jilly raised Hannah among horses, oak trees, and open skies. Here, he dug trenches by hand, planted thousands of trees, and fixed fences in the California sun. Birthdays were celebrated under barn lights. Mornings began with fog spilling softly across the hills, and the sound of hoofbeats was a music no applause could match. But even sanctuaries live under the quiet gravity of time. With blue bloods now behind him, the steady income that sustained the ranch is gone, leaving the unyielding math of upkeep, feed for the horses, irrigation for the orchards, caretakers, repairs, and taxes, all set against a body that can no longer do what it once did. In a rare moment of candor, he admitted, "I don't know if I can hold on to it much longer." To some, it was just a sentence. To those who know what this land means to him, it was a whispered heartbreak. This ranch is not merely property, it is memory made physical. It's where Hannah learned to ride, where Jilly's laughter once echoed across the fields, where a man who spent his life before the world could finally be invisible. Losing it would not mean parting with an asset. It would mean saying goodbye to the most sacred piece of a life built with love, labor, and quiet devotion. Yet, even with that shadow looming, he tends the land as he always has, slowly, deliberately, without complaint. Because some goodbyes, if they must come, deserve to be met the same way he has met every role, every trial, every loss in his life, standing tall, holding steady, and keeping faith that what was built with love can never truly be taken away. The years have a way of softening even the sharpest edges. But for Tom Selleck, they have also etched lines that tell a deeper story of endurance, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Nearing 80, he is no longer the man sprinting across Hawaiian beaches under a blazing sun or riding full gallop across open plains for a scene. The silver in his hair now catches the morning light like frost. His walk has slowed to something deliberate, and before he speaks, there's often a pause, not hesitation, but the measured cadence of a man who knows every word carries weight. These are not signs of defeat. They are the marks of someone who has lived fully, loved deeply, and paid every price without regret. He still wakes on his beloved 65-acre ranch in Hidden Valley, California, the sanctuary he bought in 1908, once owned by Dean Martin. It became more than property. It became the heartbeat of his life. Here, he and Jilly Mack raised their only child, Hannah, far from the glare of cameras. In those early years, he dug trenches by hand, planted trees that now tower over the pasture, repaired fences in the heat, and learned that a ranch has its own music, the swish of hay, the low groan of a barn door, the warm breath of a horse at dawn. Even now, those details keep him grounded when the world feels far away. Tom and Jilly's marriage has endured for over 3 decades, weathering storms that would have sunk others. They met in the blaze of his fame, but deliberately turned their backs on the Hollywood parade to build a quieter life. That choice was not selfish. It was an act of devotion to Hannah, the daughter they raised under open skies instead of flashing lights. Now in her 30s, Hannah is a professional equestrian, her discipline and grace a living reflection of the values her father carried into every role and every day. She no longer lives at the ranch full-time, but when she returns, the familiar drum of hooves on old trails seems to fold time back on itself. Tom's days still follow a ritual, waking before the sun, checking the horses, walking the perimeter, watching the light spill over the hills. But what was once easy now demands more. Decades of stunts, long shooting days, and the physical demands of his craft have left him with chronic back pain, a quiet, stubborn companion that shadows each step. In the last seasons of Blue Bloods, there were days when standing for long takes was an unspoken battle. Yet, he never let it show on camera. Now, without the constant pull of scripts and call times, the stillness of the ranch feels different. It is no longer the place he retreats to between roles. It has become the role, the stage smaller, the audience unseen, but the meaning no less profound. The tabloids print a $45 million net worth. But for Tom, true wealth has never been measured in money. It lives in the decisions he made when no one was watching, turning down Indiana Jones because he had given his word to Magnum P.I., walking away from the height of his career to care for his young daughter when illness struck, quietly covering crew bonuses from his own pocket when budgets failed. These moments, unannounced and unglamorous, are the real legacy. Jilly calls him a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. That presence has only deepened with age. Even with fewer rolls and more silver in his hair, strangers still stop him, not for selfies or gossip, but to say thank you. Thank you for showing that decency can survive in a world that rewards noise, for proving to their fathers that good men still exist. His health is no longer the unshakable foundation it once was. The work of the ranch grows heavier each year, and there is a shadow he rarely speaks of, the knowledge that one day he may have to let this place go. I don't know if I can hold on to it much longer, he admitted once, to those who know what this land means to him. Those words hit like a blow. The idea of losing the fields where Hannah learned to ride, the barn that still holds Jilly's laughter, the porch where he sipped coffee as the fog rolled in, is no mere transaction. It is the quiet breaking of something sacred. Yet, if that day comes, Tom will meet it as he has every test, with grace and resolve. You can buy land, he says, but you can't buy memories. Every tree, every fence, every sunrise has become part of a story no sale can erase. Though the world sees less of him now, he hasn't gone still inside. He reads daily, revisits the old westerns that first inspired him, answers fan letters when he can. Offers come less often, and sometimes the body simply says no. But the will to work remains. I still want to work, he admits with a small smile, but sometimes my body doesn't want to come along. There's no bitterness, only the plain truth of a man who has given his best for a lifetime and now measures success not in awards but in mornings shared with those he loves. When the bright lights of Hollywood begin to fade into the night, Tom Selleck, at the age of 80, emerges with a very different chapter of his life, one shadowed by sorrow and filled with unspoken struggles. Behind those calm, steadfast eyes are the marks left by time, silent pains he rarely reveals, and losses that can never truly heal. His body, worn down after decades of relentless dedication, carries the weight of years, along with sacrifices the world has never fully known. The persistent physical pain he endures is more than a trial of endurance. It feels as though it pushes his will and his heart to their very limits. And yet, in that place where darkness is deepest, what shines through most clearly is the strength of a man who dared to live authentically, who stood firm through every storm, and who chose a path unlike anyone else in the entertainment industry. This is not merely the story of a legendary Hollywood star. It is the journey of a man who guarded his integrity, who sacrificed quietly, and who left behind profound lessons about resilience, honesty, and the art of holding on to oneself in a world that never stops shifting. And today, as we look upon Tom Selleck in his later years, we see more than just a great actor. We uncover truths never before told, stories that, once spoken, will echo deep within the heart, like a haunting refrain that lingers and refuses to be forgotten. 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 Forgotten.